The studio that brought us the series The Chosen has an important theatrical release this summer called Sound of Freedom. This film shares the incredible true story of a former government agent and showcases the length this one man went to free a group of children abducted from their homes.
It is the fastest growing international crime network that the world has ever seen. It has already passed the illegal arms trade, and soon it's going to pass the drug trade. Because you can sell a bag of cocaine one time with a child 5 to 10 times a day. God's children are not for sale.
How long you been doing this?
12 years now.
How many pedophiles you got?
288.
How many kids you found?
Timoteo, por rescatar niños, ¿verdad? ¿Puedes ayudarme a encontrar a mi hermana?
Te lo prometo.
For Homeland Security, you know we can't go off rescuing Honduran kids in Colombia.
Which means she'll disappear for good. Imagine walking into a room right now, seeing an empty bed. What we do?
You quit your job, and you go and rescue those kids.
So at this moment, she could be a block down the road, or she could be in Moscow, Bangkok, LA. She's a major operator.
It's all rebel territory. No one goes in. Not the army, not the police, not us.
What if this was your daughter?
To talk about his hard road on the way to where good triumphs over evil and justice wins the day is former Homeland Security agent Tim Ballard. Tim, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thanks for having me on.
It's great to have you here. Tim, can you give us an idea of how big an industry child sex trafficking is?
It's enormous and shockingly enormous. It's about a $32 billion a year business. That's the transaction money. If you talk about how much money traffickers, pedophiles make on the backs of children, that's upwards of $150 billion a year. It's the fastest growing criminal enterprise in the world. The United States, though we like to pretend it's happening far, far away, we generally are the number one demand, the highest consumers of child exploitation material. And we have the border policies that are facilitating the trafficking of children right into our country. So we're right in the middle of this, and we need to wake up. And I hope the film Sound of Freedom can help wake people up.
Yeah, I know it's going to tell your story, and it's really going to raise awareness. You know, that huge dollar amount that you just mentioned, that must mean there's some pretty big players. Can you talk about maybe some big players that you encountered in your investigations?
Well, you know, it's this weird crime, right? It used to be very closet, but it's everyone and anyone. I guess the hard thing, you can't really profile this. We've arrested educators, law enforcement officers, professionals of every kind, because it's sex addiction, and sex addiction hits anyone who exposes themselves to that. And of course, the more powerful you are, the more political or monetary power you have, you'll have your way, like a Jeffrey Epstein, right? You will have, or a Harvey Weinstein, like you will have an easier time exploiting people and using them. So it really hits everywhere, and that's why the world needs to wake up. I mean, it's now rivaling the drug trade, the buying and selling of people. You can sell a bag of cocaine one time, you can sell a child 10 to 20 times in a 24-hour period, which is a real stat that actually is happening. So, and people don't want to talk about it. And if we don't talk about it, we're never going to resolve this thing.
Right. So on that note, can you describe why this film is so important right now?
You know, I think it's important, just like historically, if you look at how we ended slavery, like how we even allowed it for 350 years during that transatlantic slave trade, it's insane. But the more important question is what finally ended it. And as much as I love Abraham Lincoln, even he admitted it wasn't him. It was the storytellers. When he met Harry Beecher Stowe for the first time, who wrote the book Uncle Tom's Cabin, thus joining her voice with the great voices like Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman and others. But when he met that little author of that book, he said to her, "So you're the little lady that wrote the big book that started this war." And he knew that it was the storytellers that actually shook the foundations of Washington and actually caused him to change the course with the help of God, and he would admit that as well. But that he changed the course of the Civil War and thus changed the course of history. But it's the storytellers, it's the media, and back then it was books and tracks and speakers. Today it's motion pictures, and so we hope Sound of Freedom could be the modern day version to attack modern day slavery of Uncle Tom's Cabin, and that Eduardo Verastegui and Alejandro Monteverde, these amazing storytellers, they could be the Harry Beecher Stowe of our day, of our slavery that we need to attack hard.
Right, and just to put some realism to the conversation that you and I are having, just in those first 14 days of May, Cleveland police said that 27 children were reported missing just in those 14 days. So as an investigator, I'd like to ask you, what do numbers like that mean to you?
It means that at least it's being reported now, but it's not. It's been going on forever. I mean, I've been watching it happen, but no one talks about it. One of the most frustrating things during my 12-year career as a federal agent was I couldn't tell people. The few people around me that I could mention it to, they didn't want to believe me. They thought that child exploitation meant 17-year-olds. And how can you? Because a decent mind can't comprehend that a 7-year-old or a 5-year-old could be sexually abused and raped. Like you can't conceptualize it, and so you don't talk about it. And so I'm grateful that we're talking about it. There's media out there like your network and others who want to, are willing to shine a light into this darkness. Because until we do that, we've rescued, our foundation has rescued 7,000 women and children, and assisted through my other foundation, the Nazarene Fund, founded by Glenn Beck. I run that as well. I mean, we've helped tens of thousands of people, but even that great number is a drop in the bucket relative to 6 million children who are currently in some form of slavery. And so we cannot alone solve this problem. We can rescue the 1 and the 2 and the 3, and we'll always do that. But until the media gets involved, until people show up and we get 2 million butts in seats on July 4th to watch Sound of Freedom, until that happens, we're not going to end it.
Now, I want to ask you about, there's a line in the movie where Jim Caviezel, playing your character, he's asked about the number of perpetrators he's caught, and then he's asked, well, how many children have you rescued? Could you describe that moment in your life where everything changed?
Absolutely. All I did, and that's what the film depicts there at the time, was get the end users. And it was satisfying, but it was always haunting. Like, I'd see the videos, like, where's the kid? Can't we find the kid? We didn't have the tools and capability at the time to do much in that area. And it was at that time that I started thinking outside the box. How do we get the kids? And as the movie will show, I end up seeing for the first time. And they filmed this scene, by the way, exactly in the place at the southern border where I was working. Wow. I spent 10 years on the southern border. And it was the first time I saw a child that I had seen being sexually abused in a video. And the American trafficker was taking this little boy, this Hispanic child, kidnapping, trafficking, and making child porn videos out of the material. And he was arrested at the border, and I was the agent that was called in and began this investigation. At this time, he told me about his sister. He told me about other people, other kids, and that began this journey that's depicted in the rest of the film, Sound of Freedom. So it was that moment. It was that moment when I saw that child, and then he kind of put an exclamation point on it when he gave me this little necklace. The necklace he gave me was like a rosary to him. His sister had given it to him, and he's giving it to me. And I tried to give it back to him. He says, no, this is yours. And I don't know what he's 5 years old. I don't know if some angel was whispering in his ear or something. But later on, I discovered my name was on the necklace because there was a scripture on the back that was 1 Timothy 6:11. And so all of a sudden it becomes this symbol from God to me. The filmmakers, I told them they probably should not put this scene in the film because no one's going to believe it. They're going to think you made it up. And they said, no, we're going to put it in. It's true. And it is true. And so that was it. That was that moment that we talked about before the show started, that was transformative. That's when everything changed. And I said, I will never do anything else. My life will be dedicated to this cause. It felt to me like a calling, and that was it.
Definitely sounds like a calling for your steps to be ordered to be in that that one spot, the right place at the right time. And even having your name attached, you definitely had some red flags popping up. Can you tell us, as people see the movie, you know, they go from scene to scene, but can you tell us how long of a process was it to that first rescue of that first child?
So it was so interestingly, you know, when I left Homeland Security to start the foundation, there was two cases we were working. We were bouncing back between Haiti and Colombia. The Sound of Freedom focuses on the Colombia piece. I happen to know that they're in pre-production, all ready to tell the others because it was almost just as, or maybe even more fantastic to me at least, what happened, and godly and beautiful and miraculous. But so we were doing two operations. This all happened in 2014. The one in Haiti resulted in the rescue of 28 kids, two of which my wife and I ended up adopting, and so they're a daily reminder of the importance of our work. Then the other operation was in Colombia, which that came to fruition in October 11th of 2014. So it was basically from January to October is the amount of time it took from beginning to end, and on that operation depicted in the film. Another cool operation in the middle that's not
Right.
that's not depicted.
Gotcha. So that's after you leaving your law enforcement career, you started Operation Underground Railroad. Now, in law enforcement, you're always part of a team, and there's a scene in the movie where Jim Caviezel's character, he's of course playing you. He's headed up this river, and he looks extremely alone. How alone did you feel at times as you headed out to investigate and rescue children?
Well, especially in the beginning, many times, because you walk away from the cover. You know, I remember doing these operations and coming home and wanting to call someone to report to. I had no one to call. Our initial donor, who I would call the godfather of our foundation, was Glenn Beck. I would call Glenn just to tell someone, but even Glenn wasn't my boss. But it was like, it's a weird feeling, and you start feeling pretty alone because you don't have the top cover. You don't get to push the magic button, and a Marine unit comes to rescue you. And as we've grown, we've been able to build in some infrastructure where we have measures now. But at the time, it was very scary, and you are on your own. What it does, though, the good thing about being alone is it forces you on your knees, and you actually, if you can tap into heaven's power, well, that's even stronger than anything any government can give you anyway. So that's the silver lining in that being alone.
Right, and so that divine intervention. Can you describe maybe a moment, a God-ordained moment perhaps, where it seemed like everything was lost, but then God just came through and brought in some rescue or changed the circumstances?
I mean, I could tell you so many stories of that, but I'll briefly tell you one that just happened last year when the war in Ukraine broke out. My wife felt just so inspired. It was pure revelation, I think, and she said, "Go to Ukraine, go to Ukraine." And I said, "There's no sense in that. There's nothing I can do there." But she felt so strong. We went, and we ended up working with one of our partners at Aerial Recovery, and we rescued thousands of kids, identified a human trafficking ring out of Holland that was taking kids and trying to sell them into Mexico, Ecuador. It's insane. There's a 4-part miniseries coming out by the end of this year. But that's all. I mean, every step of that was, we blew through 6 countries, 3 continents, rescued hundreds of kids, thousands of preventative rescues in 4 months. And it's because God told my wife to send me to Ukraine, and we ended up rescuing kids in Ecuador. So that's how God works. And without that piece, nothing would work.
Right. Well, those kinds of stories, like the backstory of that divine connection and intervention, is always wonderful to hear. Now, I got to say, from what I've seen of The Sound of Freedom, it looks really intense and really compelling. How close do you think the movie is to being a snapshot of your experience at that time?
I mean, they definitely take liberties. I always say this, I'm very honest. They make Jim Caviezel, or Caviezel makes me look a lot cooler than I am, right? They didn't show some of the more cowardly moments when I did not want to do it, and I almost threw in the towel. But all the bad guys are real bad guys. All the kids are real kids. They take some liberties, mostly to cover the identities, to not disclose identities of certain victims. But I'd say 85% of what you're going to see is what actually happened, shifting some times and some places and names.
Wow. So, just shifting off from the movie just for a moment onto your organization, I was reading that you had donated trained dogs. Could you briefly describe how canine units are used in these rescue operations?
One of them, it's one of the most effective and one of the my favorite things that we do. So we work with a partner, Jordan Canine Detection, and we raise and train dogs. So bomb sniffing dogs, drug sniffing dogs. Well, these dogs are trained to hone in on a chemical, a glue type component that's in every single microchip. So it's in every cell phone, every SD card, every thumb drive, cell phone. And so what happens is these law enforcement can take these dogs into child exploitation material warrants, and the dog will find the little the micro SD card that you can hide in the carpet or in the ceiling, or these dogs will track it down, find it. And sometimes the only evidence that exists that a child's being sexually abused will be on this little tiny SD card that the pedophile's hidden. Well, no longer can they hide them because these dogs will find them. And we've deployed about 70 dogs. The vast majority of dogs that have been deployed throughout the U.S., and we have one overseas, came from our foundation. So we're kind of pioneers in this space, and we're not going to stop until every law enforcement unit that's fighting child crimes has one of these dogs.
Wow, that's wonderful. I'm pretty sure those dogs love their line of work. And as the Bible says, be sure your sins will find you out. Clearly, that is more true now than ever. Back to the movie, how can people assist maybe your organization and your work, but also the theatrical release of Sound of Freedom?
So if people go to angel.com, that's go buy tickets there. And Angel has a program where you can pay it forward, where buy tickets for yourself, your family, but you can buy as many tickets as you want for those who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford it. Because we want 2 million people on the weekend of July 4th in theaters, representing the 2 million children currently in the commercial sex trade. So angel.com is the key. That's the best and most effective thing people can do right now to help us fight human trafficking.
Wonderful. Well, I'm sure that our viewers will be very engaged with that angel.com website after they see this interview. Tim, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Genuine thanks for joining us and speaking to us about this important movie.
Well, thank you for having me on. We can't do it without media partners, so thank you.